I do a little thanks to the committee, but it wasn't. All righty. Thanks, everybody, so much for coming out. And there's a lot of people here that's worked really hard to make this happen. If you have worked on the committee, could you stand up real quick? These people have been working extra hard to make sure this is going on. All right, well, I'm excited about tonight's main speaker. And going through the speaker tapes, there were a lot of close choices. And we settled on Andrea. She carries a great message. I don't personally know a lot about her. I'd say tons of good stuff, but she's been a wonderful person since she's got here. And it's been wonderful to meet her. And Andrea L. is tonight's speaker.
I'm an addict. My name's Andrea. Holy cats, there's a lot of you. And I hardly know any of you. And I don't go to a lot of conventions anymore where I don't know a ton of people. And so it's been really nice to be here this weekend and meet people and get to know some addicts I didn't know before and find the beautiful, beautiful recovery that's up here. I live in the desert. I'm visiting from New Mexico, and is that better or worse? Okay, yeah, and it's been really super dry, like even for us out there, and so being here in the green, it just feels, like a grape coming back to a raisin. Other way, okay. All right, it's going to be like that tonight, I see. Yeah, dyslexia. It's not for reading anymore. This is also my first trip away from home since my husband died 8 weeks ago. And good noise. Thank you. So I'm an Ander tonight for the first time in a long time. I'm an addict and a widow, and it's a lot of my story right now. So trigger warning, there's a lot of death. The good news, I am not going to be Debbie Downer. I come to you tonight with a message of gratitude and awe for what we do together as Narcotics Anonymous and for what we bring to the process of life all the way to the last breath and beyond when we work this thing. The first convention I ever went to was called Beyond Our Wildest Dreams, just like this one. And so that's super cool. And I didn't get the theme until I got here. And so I'm like a little verklempt about that. And that convention was in New Jersey. I wasn't living there at the time, but we drove up from D.C., where I'm from, and it was in a brand new hotel in Parsippany, whatever that is. And I need to tell you, we pretty much burned the place down. Like they actually had to close it after we left and redo it. And you know, and it was an incredibly destructive blast. And while I'm not going to say I hated every minute of that, or I was embarrassed at the time because it was really fun. It's really cool to be at a convention where the staff loves us and where the hotel is impressed. And, you know, we carry a message by what we do as much as by what we say we do. And so when we are in a place like this where everybody knows who we are, where we're not very anonymous, it's kind of amazing who we're reaching. Because I promise you, the people who work here, if they don't need to be among us, they've got a family member, they've got a kid, they've got a friend, they've got a friend's kid. Somebody needs Narcotics Anonymous, you know. The beautiful thing about this program is that we change lives, and the difficult thing is that we don't change as many lives as need to be changed, right? And there was a time when Narcotics Anonymous could work hand in hand with industries around addiction and treatment in a way that was really super cooperative. And if we picked up a scary newcomer, we could drop them off at detox and pick them up a couple of weeks later and teach them how to talk right? And now if we drop somebody off at detox, they come out on more meds than we sent them in on, right? And we are in a position today where we need to learn to do our own 12-step work again. Hell yeah. Right? And that starts with how we carry ourselves and what we show people about what it means to be a member of Narcotics Anonymous. I got clean in Washington, D.C. in 1985. And what I can tell you about my clean date is it's kind of a reconstruction. What I know is I was going to meetings and they seemed like a good idea. And I really liked what I was getting in the meetings that I went to. But everybody was super excited that summer because they were having this event at this hotel downtown, and they were like, there's going to be 10,000 of us, and there's going to be all these speakers. And I was like, oh, I've heard this before. I'm going to be selling flowers at the airport, right? And so I did not go to the World Convention in my hometown to pick up a white chip because I was too cool and I knew better. So as far as I know, I got clean immediately after that. But I am a 13-step success story. And it is a program of attraction. You know, if you're in treatment or if you're involved with the courts, the key word is compliance, right? You just got to do what they say. But if you're in recovery, compliance will only get you so far, right? Like it talks about in What Can I Do? Go on, take the first step from the previous chapter, it says, and go on to the second, and so on, and you will come to an understanding of this program for yourself. We are the only 12-step program that actually says that outright in its literature. That's one of the things that sets Narcotics Anonymous apart. We need to understand this thing for ourselves, whatever that means, right? And usually what that means, I don't know about you guys, but I only learn by arguing with things. And I find balance by bouncing off both walls, and I have to have something to disagree with before I can figure out what's true, right? And so there's a lot of wrong ways to do recovery, but the only mistake that matters is getting loaded, right? Everything else is a learning experience. And so I'm proud to say that I've made most of them. And I'm still here. I have one clean date. I have one program, right? I have one disease. Well, I'm older now, so I have a few more. Starting to collect. One of the things that's happened in the last few years is I had been really, really sick for a long time. I had Lyme disease twice, and things got complicated, and I was on a cane, and then I was on 2 canes, and I was in and out of the hospital, and I was on a lot of steroids, and it was really hard, and it was really scary, and then it stopped being scary. I had this incident about 5 years ago where I was in ICU. I was parked next to a ventilator. They were deciding when they were going to plug me in. It was one of those nights that I just barely got through. And the thing was, I wasn't scared. And I'm glad not to be afraid to die, but I need to limit my willingness on that, right? And so it's one thing to learn not to be afraid to die, and it's another thing to be excited to live. And you guys teach me that every day. I was at this 4th of July event, and a friend of mine spoke. I sponsored him for about 20 minutes, one of those, and I adore him, and I'm really glad that we can just be friends. And when I was driving him home after, and he said something about, it's hard not to tell all those war stories. And I said, the cool thing about having clean time is that it gets really hard to find time in a share to tell all the recovery stories. And so I'm going to miss some big stuff, right? What I can tell you is happy, well-adjusted kids do not fall in a pile of meth. Addiction doesn't just happen, right? And I started using young. I got clean young, and we were talking about that earlier today, what that meant for somebody. We were eating with somebody we didn't know and just chatting, my friend and I, and he said, wow, you're lucky to get clean that young. I was like, no, what young means is no maintenance period, that there are people who know how to use and maintain. So my husband was 20 years older than me, and we had the same clean time. And when he told his story, it was a great war story, man. There was an actual war in it. And he was a musician. He was in all these bands, and he'd been married and lived all these places. And that wasn't how my story went. I picked up, and from the first time I used, that's all I did. And I was really mad. I was regularly mad to wake up. Damn it. Here I am again. Another day. Right? And I thought that was all there was going to be. People talk, I argue with things a lot, right? So there's this whole thing about lost dreams awaken, and I am not down with that because I didn't have lost dreams. I left off lost dreams at Ballerina Fireman, and I didn't have big plans for my life. I was going to use and I was going to die, and that was cool. And I have a best friend, and we started using together. We got clean together. We're both still clean. We're still best friends. That doesn't happen very often. I'm so lucky. And she met a boy who was in NA and started chasing him, which involved going to meetings. And he also had a best friend, and so and I had a car. I was the one who drove. I was also the last one to get clean. And these boys had about 9 months or a year, something like that. If I knew them today, I would totally fucking backhand them for this. But better. But I'm high. I'm driving. We're going to meetings. We're going to late movies. We're hanging out. It's good. It's good. And I heard this definition of desperation. No, I heard a definition of despair recently, which was the belief that every day will be exactly like the last. Right? And that was the heart of my addiction, It wasn't, I don't believe in bottom. I don't think our disease recognizes bottom. I think the only bottom addiction recognizes is death. And I didn't get clean the day after the worst day of my addiction. I got high. What I think what happened for me is not that I hit a bottom, but that I hit a ceiling, where nothing was working to make it better anymore, and it wasn't killing me. And that was really frustrating. I was just stuck. I couldn't I'd love to say I was using that hard, but I'm not even that glamorous. I was too depressed to get high anymore. It just wouldn't work, and nothing was taking the edge off. And I just wasn't okay. I was never okay. And I my parents sent me to this fancy shrink trying to fix it because, the fancier it is, the more likely it is to work. And, well, it's expensive. It must be good. Come to think of it, I tried that a few times, too. But But what he said after he got done talking to me for a while was that I was batshit crazy and that I would never be okay and that I needed to take this medication forever, which probably wouldn't be that long because I probably wouldn't survive. He was a nice guy. And I wish that the Thorazine he gave me was the only drug I was taking at the time, but it wasn't. And that, I don't know if any of you have some experience with major tranquilizers, maybe one or two, but if you haven't met them, what they do is they suck all the color out of the world. And so I spent a night staring at a mirror with all the color gone. And sometime after the sun came up, I had this moment of clarity where I was like, wow, their drugs really don't work. And if their drugs don't work, I bet mine don't either. And I had been going to some meetings, and I don't know the order anymore. I used to think I knew the order of my story, and I don't anymore. But it was right around then. I went to a meeting, and I picked up a white chip, and it was... I was new there. It was in a circle. It was in a kindergarten room in this church. It had a psychedelic carpet. It was one of those meetings that breaks up. You guys do this up here. We don't do it where I live now. But the meeting breaks up, and it was the beginners meeting, right? And the beginners meeting was in the kindergarten room. It was on these short little chairs. And later I asked somebody, when you're done at that meeting, when you get to graduate, and they said, when the carpet stops moving. They renovated way before that happened, but I picked up a white chip that night, and I picked up this boy, and I never picked up another white chip, and I can't say that about boys. But I will say this in defense of that behavior, is that being in that relationship my first 9 months kept me from burning a path out the door. And after we broke up, I went on a little tear and I made a big mess. And by the time I made a big mess in here, I already had some friends, I had a sponsor, I had a support group, and I knew enough to start going to meetings on the other side of town, you know. And I'm really grateful for that, because the thing that makes me sad when I see people come in and get into a big mess early in recovery is that they leave here thinking this is like every place else. And it so doesn't have to be, but it can be, you know. And it's all about who we surround ourselves with in here. It's all about what we're willing to reach out for and who reaches out to us. And, you know, among the many things I'm powerless over, I have never gotten to choose. When I am falling, I have never gotten to choose who catches me. And any time I think I get to choose that, I will not be caught. The spirit of anonymity applies big time when I need you. And I think I need you. I think I need this individual person in front of me. And I'm always wrong about that, right? What I need is to be caught. And my higher power works through all y'all. And it doesn't matter who you are or how well I know you or how much clean time you have or what I think of your boyfriend or whatever, right? It's like, I need you today. And I do not know who is going to save my life next, so I better make damn sure the door is open for them. I went back to school on a dare with about 18 months clean. I took a class, I failed it. My sponsor said, okay, now we know you can survive failure. I really wanted it to be dramatic. She said, why don't you just go through the catalog and pick something that sounds interesting? And so I did, without any regard to what I was going to do when I grew up, and that wound up being what I did when I grew up. And because I was open-minded, you know, and I didn't know, like when I graduated from high school, I was using hard, and I was at the bottom of my class. I was voted most likely to drive off a bridge. I was pregnant, probably by a teacher, but I couldn't confirm that. And I got a diploma because they needed me gone, right? And it was one of those. It wasn't even like a consolation prize diploma. It was like, and don't come back. And I went to college for a minute at that point. I left with no credits, which if you've been to college, you know is really actually kind of hard to do. Like, I didn't think I could do that. I didn't think I was smart. I knew I was smart, but not in a good way, right? Like, I'd been bullied massively as a kid for being smart, and books were my first drug. And because my childhood was super violent outside the home, like, my family was crazy, but if I left the house, I got hurt, and so I spent a lot of time with books in trees, and I was a really good tree climber, and I would be way up high, out of the way, watching life go by, reading the same books over and over again, trying to get into some other world, and I just couldn't fit. I didn't do peer relations well, is the way the professionals would say it now, and I didn't do them well when I left school either. And we were in a city that had a really active kind of subculture scene, and my girlfriend was super into that. She was like, super queen hardcore girl, and I drove. And I couldn't get it right. I couldn't even be a nonconformist right, I'd wear the party dress to the hardcore show. I just couldn't do it. And because I was always who I was, and I always thought that was wrong. I always thought something was wrong with that, but that's the reality. Is I am exactly who my Creator created me to be. And the work in recovery is about peeling away all the bullshit that stands between that true self and the rest of the world, right? And there is so much bullshit there. Oh my God. If you don't yet know how full of shit you are, keep coming back. I didn't know what kind of music I liked. I didn't know what my favorite color was. I learned later, when I got sick and my body really changed and I gained a bunch of weight real fast, I realized that I had never known what I looked like. And I still didn't. I didn't actually hate myself more when I gained 100 pounds because I'd always hated myself, right? So it's like I didn't know. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was doing. And the steps helped to teach me some of those things. And it was working with a really good sponsor. I didn't start in the steps. I have friends who say they were raised by wolves. I was not. I was raised by poodles, right? Yappy, overbred, a little vicious, right? And the thing about, I don't know if any of you are dog people, if you have smart dogs, right? But the thing about a smart dog is that if you do not give it a job, it will bite you, right? They get super agitated and then they bite you. And we are a lot like dogs. And I am definitely a border collie. Like, I need a job or I'm going to just go a little bit nuts. So what happened when I got clean was not that I found a message that spoke to me or that you guys taught me that I could be somebody or any of that stuff. What happened was I could be useful. And we were still pretty new as a fellowship, although I didn't really understand that. And NA was about 5 years old in DC, I want to say. It's a guess, maybe less. But there were a few people with a few years who were totally enthusiastic. They were on fire trying to, make NA be its own thing, right? And break it away and making sure that our identity was clear and stuff. And they were like, hey, there's shit to do. Addicts are dying. Get busy, right? They'd hand me a clipboard and get me to sign up subscriptions to the NA Way or whatever. I found a home group, me and my best friend, and we started making coffee there. And the first time we made the coffee, it was okay, and somebody jacked me up. And they were like, this is not an okay coffee kind of group. This is a cool group. We have good coffee. And and they taught me to care. They were like, damn it, you're going to care, right? And so, among the things I learned was a little bit of salt in those aluminum coffee pots takes the bitterness out. And back in the olden days, we would add a cinnamon stick in the winter, and right, not the worst thing. And I, it got to be like I'd come super early and get like all OCD about the cookie train. They would be like Oreos and pecan sandies alternating around the tray, like all pretty. And the literature would go out in some kind of array, and I cared. And we had a key to that church, and I need to tell you, I am a stone thief. I think that's really fun, right? Not just like getting shit to sell it or whatever. Like, that was my idea of a good time, and was getting away with stuff. And I had the key to that church, and I never stole anything from it. I never slept in it. I never had sex in it. Like, I respected the space. And you guys taught me that. And what happened at the end of that, I don't know if it was 6 months or a year. Like I said, time and I are not on speaking terms right now. But at the end of that, they clapped and thanked us at the group conscience. And I realized it was the first time I'd completed anything, ever. Like, I was the queen of 80%. The most chilling words I ever heard in my addiction were, "You have so much potential," right? And being a part of and being able to see things through, that was really important to me. And I wasn't really connecting. I had a sponsor, sort of, and I found somebody who had what I wanted. That's what they said. But I didn't know who I was or what I wanted, right? So I found somebody who was like cute and tiny and blonde, and she was dating a doctor, and she would say to me all the time, she would say, "I'm really trying to understand you." And she really was. And she really didn't. But because she really didn't, she would like tell me to raise my hand at every meeting and share, right? Because she couldn't deal with hearing it every night. And it was a long time before I realized that was why. And to reach out and get women's phone numbers and talk to people, right? Like she taught me how to network in here and how to build a we. And through building that we, I kind of worked my way through a few sponsors. And then I was at Area, and I was a GSR, and I wanted more, and I got, I gave one of those ego-y, ambitious newcomer speeches about, because I wanted to be vice chair. And so, like, I gave a lovely speech I wasn't sharing about how I would do anything to help Narcotics Anonymous. And I didn't realize what a setup that was. There was an activities committee that was $1,000 in the hole, and they were like, "Anything, huh? Congratulations." And I would come to Area every month and whine, and this woman would call me afterwards and yell at me, and we went back and forth this way for a while, and finally I said, "If you're going to yell at me all the time, you might as well be my sponsor." And she was like, "If you'll use me." And I did for 14 years. And what she said about sponsorship early was that this would be my first honest, intimate relationship. And that was my experience. And so we worked through a lot of difference together. We were very different. We were very different culturally. We had a lot of prejudices about each other and where we came from. And we talked about it openly. We really struggled with, like, the ways that we were with people. Why are you so mean to people all the time? Why do you touch people all the time? All that stuff. And she would ask me, honestly and openly, "I don't understand what you're doing. Is that a character defect or a cultural difference?" And that question allowed us to kind of open up some really honest conversations. And sometimes the answer was one, and sometimes it was the other. I'm Jewish, and there are some things that come with the way that I was raised. I mean, there's 31 flavors, right? But the way that I was raised was very nurturing and kind of intrusive and very physically affectionate. And the way that I know how to pray, the highest form of prayer I know, it used to be the highest form of prayer I knew was sharing in meetings, but the reality is the way I know to pray is to feed people. That's how I serve my higher power, is to feed people. And so, this whole touchy-feely thing, she was like, are you flirting? I'm like, no, I just need a hand on me right now, right? And, like there's something about, this is what's so important about hugging, right, is that, like, there's something about that physical contact. Like, most of us have the experience when we get here of having been a project for somebody or a problem, and kind of scary most of our lives. Like, I remember being like a kid on the streets, and people would pull their kids away from me, and being held. There were a couple of people in the rooms. I still remember who they were when I came in. I bet you remember who they were when you came in. Who would hug me until my shoulders dropped, who would hug me until our breath matched, right? Who would just hold for a while until our heartbeats started to synchronize, And something happens in that. Something happens to our brains in that can be measured, and something happens to our spirits in that cannot be measured. And I knew from the first meeting that was what I needed. I did not know how to pray. I still suck at it. But what that sponsor told me was that she was like, well, when you go into a church and there's a meeting there, you know which room is the meeting, even if you don't know anybody, right? And I was like, yeah. And she said, okay, that feeling, that's the presence of your higher power. And she said, and when you share feelings, she said, prayer is sharing feelings with your higher power. And so when you pray in a meeting, when you share in a meeting, that's what you're doing, right? And this is still the highest form of prayer that I know, right? Is sharing in a meeting, because I know my higher power is here. And I didn't expect to get emo here, but then I didn't think this was what I was going to be talking about. So there you go. I took that one class at the community college, and it went well, and then I took more, and I wound up going to a really fancy college, and I left where I grew up for the first time to go to school, so let me back up. The thing that happened with Susie, with that sponsor, I had 3 years the first time I worked a fifth step, and I discovered the power of the steps. I discovered what we could do for ourselves in the steps. But I'm a border collie, so I was in service all the time, right? And so we would meet at service workshops. We would meet at regional meetings. We didn't live very close together. I've never had a sponsor who lived in my town. And we would work steps. And so there was this real intertwining for me of doing service and working steps, right? These things weren't separate. And when I moved from D.C. to New Jersey, 6 weeks before I got there, I had a post office box and a service commitment. And I wasn't really sure about school, and I didn't fit in. I did really well in my classes, but I didn't make any friends. And I still didn't know how, like that peer relationship thing, I still don't know how to do that, but I can share from the heart. I can do this. I can't do the other thing. Still, I'm not very good at it. I've gotten better, but geez. And I wasn't there then. And so I went back to school, and I really found a path, and I thought I knew what I was going to do. And I got a very fancy fellowship to graduate school, and I moved to a city I'd never seen to do this work. And while I was doing this behind the scenes, the field that I was in was collapsing. And so by the time I qualified for a job, 70% of the jobs were gone. Hey, Michigan, I bet you get this story. And as the jobs dried up, it got really toxic, right? Because everybody's fighting for the last scraps, and so like teachers and students are fighting for the same job, right? And so it's really like a really toxic environment. I did not understand that. But I moved to this town, and I didn't fit in the NA community there, and I was freaked out, and I was going to meetings, and it wasn't working. And moving is really hard and scary in recovery. And so what I did, I took a I found a noon meeting that was close to campus, and I took the GSR position, and because that would keep me going. And it was like right next to the psych hospital, and it was like me and one other person with time and a bunch of newcomers and a bunch of inpatients. And that was enough to kind of, it was a thin thread, but it was holding me there. And one day I went out to lunch with one of the new guys, and he was complaining bitterly that he had gone to this meeting the night before, and it was stupid. And I said, what happened? He said, it was all these old timers, and it was supposed to be a step meeting, but they laughed through the whole thing. And like it was some kind of joke, like recovery was funny or something. I said, oh, God, that's terrible. Where's this meeting? And that became my home group. And there was a guy there who I knew in service. When I knew him in service, his name was That Bastard. And he was the only person I knew in NA in Pittsburgh was That Bastard. And I hadn't run into him those first months that I was there, but he was in this home group, of course, laughing about the steps like it was something funny, because it is. And because really, we're hilarious. Get to know us. We are really ridiculous. And the more I can see how funny my shit is, the more I can stop trying to control it into shape, and I can laugh at it and let go. Right? There's a reason that the Buddha is laughing so much in the paintings of him, right? Like this is funny. And oh my God, check me out. But this guy was there, and it turned out that his building backed up to mine. Like we shared a backyard pretty much on the same block, and we hadn't run into each other. But we did then, and we started hanging out some. And I was in a relationship that was crumbling badly, and we just hung out. You know, nothing was going on really. And my dad had a stroke, massive brainstem aneurysm. And he survived it, which was a terrible idea. And things got really crazy because, like I said, my family's pretty nuts. And we staged like a full-on like Bergman movie in the ICU waiting room for about 7 weeks. It was horrible. And my sponsor at the time was very ill. She was in a mental hospital, and I didn't have anyone to turn to. And so I called this guy, and I had made this list of what I wanted in my next relationship. And you know, they tell you to do this, right? This is one of those beyond our wildest dreams. The problem with this is that we think we know what direction that is, right? So I made one of those lists, and you know, they also tell us that if we think we know what our higher power has for us, we're selling ourselves short. And they say that, and then they say, make a list of what you want in a relationship, right? Like, dumb. But I did that, and this person met absolutely no thing on the list, including gender. And but what happened during that hospital drama was that he never didn't answer the phone. And he always had something to say. And he always, like, I got off the phone with a tool that I didn't have when I got on the phone. And I had a lot of things on that list, but emotional competency was not one of them, because it never occurred to me to want that, right? Because beyond my wildest dreams means outside of my imagination, right? I cannot imagine a color I have never seen. It's just a brain thing, right? I cannot imagine for myself a life I have never seen, I've never known, right? It's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to watch each other in here. It's because we get to see things we hadn't seen before. I had never seen a healthy relationship. I didn't believe in unconditional love deep into my recovery because I had never seen it. And you guys taught me, what you guys told me was I didn't have to believe in it. I could just try to practice it. I didn't have to believe I could get there, right? And I had this day, it wasn't that long ago. I was at the airport waiting for my sister to pick me up. It was raining. I'd just come across the country. She was on the phone. She was telling me why she wasn't there. It wasn't true. I knew it. I was getting ready to take another $100 cab because it wasn't the third time this had happened. And I had this awareness that unconditional means never saying unconditional. It means not telling you that's what I'm doing, right? And I showed up, and my niece called me while I was in the airport, and she said, "Just get in a cab and save Passover. Like, nothing is done. We have to get dinner on the table," right? And I was like, totally dysfunctional, right? And like, that's what I did. It's like I just got in a cab and made dinner. And that's what love looks like. It doesn't look like the storybook thing. It doesn't look like Sleepless in Seattle. It looks like showing up and making dinner. This guy I fell in love with, he moved in about 10 minutes. And I'm serious. He lived right across the street, and I was like, you know, your roommates have to be worried about you. Will you just go home and say hi? And he like went there, picked up socks, and came back. And it was a fierce and difficult love. And man, met my match, right? A worthy opponent. We had argued for years in service, and now we got to do it at home. And and the first years we were together, we actually used Robert's rules in our arguments, which I recommend highly, because when somebody starts with "you always" or "you never," you can say, "There's a motion on the table." Right? Like, this is why just a little pitch for parliamentary procedure here in the middle of everything. This was why I loved that stuff, was because there were rules and I could learn them. And like when I started doing literary history, because that's what I did for a while, like I became an expert in the history of etiquette. I read hundreds of etiquette books from about a century and a half because I just needed to know how people be. How do you be? How do you know how to get through dinner? I don't know, right? Like, I can't have a normal conversation. I thought I was crazy, which is a pretty good sign in case you're wondering that you're not. People who are genuinely mentally ill think they're fine and everyone else is crazy. But I really, I just couldn't fit. I couldn't make it work. I didn't know how to be in the world. And you guys gave me some rules for living and for how to do that, right? And that started with the stuff that I learned in service. And I had to do a lot of that work before I could trust you enough to work steps. And eventually, doing that work, I needed to work steps to be able to do that and not cut a bitch. And so this process is circular, right? Like, each of these things feeds into each other. I found the third step through the second tradition. It was watching us actively try to destroy ourselves as a fellowship and fail. That I saw a loving God having authority over what we were doing, because our best efforts were so self-destructive at that point, and we were growing anyway. And I started to see that in NA, and I could say, if I can see this power working in our fellowship, perhaps it can work in my life. Perhaps I can try, I can experiment with turning my will and my life over. I had a sponsor who was Taoist for a long time. I could never be. I'm not that serene. But I'm not chill enough to be a Buddhist. I just hang around them a lot. But he would say to me all the time, let go or be dragged. And that's what it comes down to. Like if I turn it over and I don't let go, I'm just upside down, right? I watched us do this as a group, as a fellowship, as a society, right? And then I got willing to practice it in my life. I saw recovery working in the lives of the people I was getting clean with, and I had to believe that maybe I was along for the ride too. There was a night I was crying. I was hysterical, as usual. They used to call me Tammy Faye because I would cry so much when I was new. And somebody said, it gets better. And I said, how do you know? You don't know me. And he said, actually it's too cruel a lie. If it wasn't true, we'd let you go. And I heard that, So we get into this relationship, and it's hard. It's really hard. But we shared a home group for a long time, and about 2 years in, he got sick, and I'm like in graduate school, which is like hard, and I'm taking care of my dad, who's in and out of a coma, 4 hours away, and then Shannon gets this brain thing. Well, first he got Hep C in this way that affected his brain, and he went crazy, and like really crazy, and I had no idea that middle-aged Jewish ladies looked so much like the Viet Cong, but apparently we're indistinguishable. But it was a series of illnesses and recoveries that were varying degrees of miraculous over the years. Sometimes it was a medical miracle. They'd find the right drug, and sometimes it was, some shaman would come and do something, and he would, when we moved to New Mexico, he started working with these woo-woo healers, and when we got there, he couldn't walk most of the time, and he certainly couldn't talk most of the time. It was a lot like Parkinson's, but not really, and Agent Orange, man, it is not a good drug. And 3 months after we moved there, he was rock climbing. I can't account for that. I don't know how that happened or why that happened, but I saw it. Will saw it. He was just talking last night about getting off the plane in New Mexico the first time, and Shannon walked up to greet him, and he took 3 steps back, right? Like it was actually kind of scary. And so we were on this journey together where I'm trying to, and when we were in Pittsburgh, I was working. I remember I did this thing when I was 5 years clean. I shared it at a convention. It was another one of those great ego moments. Just so you know, your higher power will begin by whispering to you and will end by whomping you like a baby seal. You can listen when they're whispering, or you can wait. And I remember sharing at this convention that I had balance because I was working a full-time job, and I had a boyfriend, and I was in school full-time, and I had a service commitment at every at the area and the group and the region, and I was doing, and this was balance to me, and the result was that I collapsed of exhaustion, and it was many years before I got well. And so I'm trying to do all this, and what's happening is I'm failing, and I cannot admit that. I cannot surrender. And the relationship failed, and I went out to New Mexico for a while to recover because I had summers off, and I had an experience there that I hadn't had before, which was I fit. For the first time in my life, I felt like I fit somewhere. And I can't say enough good things about the geographical cure. It's right up there with the 13th step for controversial things. I'm going to stand for it tonight. But, there's some stuff I can't outrun, and there's some stuff that's the only way to get past it. That, I couldn't shake my jacket, I had a jacket. That was who I was. And it's the meanest thing we do to each other in here is that we decide who each other is, and then we keep each other in that box. And recovery is a process of spiritual growth and transformation. And if we don't allow each other to change and trust that change, then we prevent it. And sometimes we really get in each other's way. This thing is so beautiful and so fragile. And somebody was talking, Patrick was talking this afternoon, he called this a footwork miracle, right? It is a stone miracle, but you got to do the work to make it happen. But there's another part of that footwork miracle, which is that we have to be walking together. My personal recovery depends on NA unity. And what does that look like? It looks like we got to be walking together. And I can't I can't say my personal recovery depends on how well you work your program. So I got to find the people that I can walk with. And if you're coming to meetings and you're wondering if this is for you and you haven't found your people yet, keep looking. Go to different meetings. I just got the 10-minute warning, and I haven't gotten to the shit I thought I was going to talk about the whole time. So there you go. Shannon had a series of strokes about 4 years ago, and most impressively, he died on Thanksgiving night in Will's arms at a party, and then he revived, which I can't really explain either, and sat in a circle and told horrible war stories all night, and told people he loved them, and we were pretty sure that was the end. And we went to the VA hospital the next day, and he woke up, but he woke up somebody else, and it got really scary for a while, and he was in and out of the hospital. He was in and out of geriatric psych. He was in and out of his own body. We would say sometimes, I'd be talking to him, and then something would happen. His eyes would change, and things would get really dark. And I would say, "Oh, it's the other guy, right? Like he's the other guy right now." And I've learned that a lot of us have the other guy, and I do too, as there. And these steps are remarkable for what they change in us, but there are still some things that are present, right? And sometimes, what I want to be able to say is, if I do the work, those things are going to go away. But sometimes things happen to us that we're powerless over, and we don't want to be powerless, right? Look, I'm not a Bible person. I will pray in any language I don't speak. But Job, I dig Job, right? Because the thing about Job is working a spiritual program, and he knows it. And all this horrible, gnarly shit happens. And he's like, yeah, I know, but I'm cool. And all of his friends are like, there's something you're not doing, man. There's something you're missing, right? You got to be doing something wrong. We don't know about it. Maybe it's late at night. I don't know. Maybe, was there porn on clay tablets? And he's like, no, I'm not, I'm cool. I'm right with my God, and I don't know what's happening here, right? And sometimes these things happen, right? And it happened to Shannon real bad. And he got this thing called central pain syndrome, where his brain was manufacturing pain and sending it out all over his body, and he couldn't tell the difference between like physical and emotional pain, and it was horrible. And he was in a bunch of different hospitals, and the VA was not our friend. If you are among our friends who have been in Vietnam, please make sure your paperwork is right while you can. But things went really sideways in his care, and he wound up staying with some friends for a few months, and they couldn't deal, and they couldn't get him the help he needed. And so what they did was they dropped him back on my doorstep, and I was afraid. I was afraid of him. I didn't think I had the strength to do it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how we were going to handle this, and what happened was he had been the mayor of the noon meeting for a really long time. And when the guys from the noon meeting heard he was home, they brought a meeting. And then they brought another one. And when they brought that first meeting, he was bent over in a wheelchair and wrapped in blankets. And he sat there unresponsive through the whole thing. And at the very end, he picked his head up and told a 20-minute step-a-log. And so they came back 3 days later, and then they kept coming, and that meeting is still at my house twice a week. And I learned that serenity is an inside job, right? Serenity is being like in here, all lined up in here. But I learned this other word, equanimity. Equanimity is putting it outside, right? Is wearing that. Sometimes like an ill-fitting garment, right? But wearing that on the outside. And he couldn't handle any kind of stress or overstimulation, and so I learned to leave my shit at the door and come in cool. and ask over and over and over again, are you comfortable? Are you safe? Do you have what you need? Do you know you're loved? 6, 7 times a day, until he could answer in the affirmative. And we said, I love you 12 times a day. Even when he couldn't say anything else, we could manage that. When we started hospice after my dad died badly on Father's Day last year, and it was our 3rd hospice. And my parents both died violently in hospitals, and I watched this last one go down. I was like, there's no time that he's going to re-enter a hospital. I cannot do that. And, and the thing was, it was hard, right? It was a hard relationship, and he was not who he once was. And what I got to, because I practice these principles, because I learned in here that this is an inside job, what I got to was the understanding that I am not doing this because of who he is. I am doing it because of who I am, right? That there were some things that I could not allow to happen. And so I needed to do this, even if it felt wrong, even if it was hard, even if it cost me everything. I got to do this, right? And once I said, it's not about who he is, it's about who I am, what that did was it totally let him off the hook. It didn't matter what happened. It didn't matter what went before. It didn't matter how hard a relationship was or the things that he did because he'd come back to himself sort of and be really strong and steal the car and go gallivanting and shit. It was crazy. The caregivers would call me and say, he's gone again. I'm like, where are you going to find him this time, But he stayed clean, and I stayed clean. And we were surrounded by the love of Narcotics Anonymous. And people came to our house. And what happened with that house meeting over those 4 years of caring for him was that people kept coming who were new and saying, I feel really safe here. The people who were his old friends couldn't really stand to see him like that. But newcomers could because they didn't know him any other way. And what they saw was whatever kind of shape he was in, he was going to stagger to the table and carry a message. Because he was the kind of arrogant old-timer that he didn't think people were bringing him a message because they felt bad for him. They were coming to hear him. And so he better find something to say. And so he did. And even if it was the same thing, a lot of the time, it was a message. And the simple fact that he would try was a message. And when he got sicker and he couldn't get off the couch, we would have the meeting at the front of the living room. He'd be on the couch in the back, and then we'd circle up and pray and include him in the circle and pray him out. And the week he was actively dying, I woke up on a Monday, and it wasn't good. And I called the hospice nurse. She was there at 9, and the chaplain was there at 11, and then the phone system went dead in my whole zip code, and there were no phones. And so I can't really account for how my house filled with people, but it did. And for the next 3 weeks, my front door was open. There was a sign on it that said, don't knock, just come in. And 24/7, there were people in my house. That Thursday night, the house meeting was scheduled, and the doctor was there, and I said, what do we do? It's like trying to stop a train. I can't make people not come. And she said, well, this meeting is the center of his world, right? And I said, yeah. She said, why would you deprive him of it now? And so we had the meeting with him in the hospital bed in the back of the room, and the chaplain came right before and did last rites, and she was awesome, and she passed the holy oil around and offered everybody the opportunity to bless him. And there was a rabbi there who did last rites in Hebrew, and there was a Muslim guy who did them in his faith, and there were some Navajo dudes who did this Diné ceremony over him, and somebody else did Reiki, like we were dialing in on all channels, and because he always did, like premium cable to God, There is a booby trap in our steps, in the 3rd step, right? There was this effort historically when the steps were being written to make sure that the fellowship didn't get sucked into some evangelical mold, right, like had happened before. And so this qualifier, God as we understand him, was placed there to make sure that we weren't talking about one particular understanding. It was whatever your understanding is. But the booby trap in that is that we think that we have to understand God. And we cannot, right? Like, I'm sorry, if you can, that's awesome for you. But I don't want to insult your faith, but when the literature was being translated into Arabic, there was an issue because God as we understand him is heretical in that faith. And so the way that step reads, I much prefer it in the Arabic, which is we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to God in his infinite mystery. And I can handle that. I can get with that because I got stuck in that K-hole of trying to understand God for a really long time, and I thought I couldn't get past it. I thought I couldn't, like, there was another reason why NA wasn't going to work for me, and Shannon was the kind of person that was always seeking, and he read a lot of Merton, he read a lot of Rumi, and he read a lot of NA literature and wrote a lot of it, and a lot of our founders were into these weirdo traditions. That's one of the things that's different about NA from the mothership, was we had a lot of the people who were involved in writing our literature were part of meditative traditions, were part of all kinds of spiritual traditions, and that's reflected in the kind of openness in our spirituality, and seeing that work was amazing. Shannon died an hour after that meeting ended on Saturday night. They had moved the meeting to the porch, and there were people out there, and they were hanging out, and they were smoking cigarettes, and there was a pot of coffee on, and they were eating his Oreos because it was time to get him gone, and they were playing guitar badly, and I'm feeling terrible in case my friends who were so devoted and wonderful hear this tape and know how badly they played Knocking on Heaven's Door. But they were there, and I have been lifted up and carried through this whole experience. My friend came in from California. My best friend was there the whole week that this was going on, and she described it as the ant colony, because there were all these people moving. Nobody was in charge. There was breakfast every morning, but there were never two breakfasts, but nobody seemed to be in charge of organizing anything. Like, it just all happened sort of magically. And the thing I need to tell you about that is that the people who were doing this some of them had 45 days clean. Some of them had less. Some of them had 2 years. Some of them had 30. But there was a girl with 30 days who was 19 years old who just sat by that bedside for hours, so steadfast. It was amazing. And it took a little. We had a little doing after he passed, but Will came in and I had found a place, and we buried him in his sponsor's Pendleton blanket in the desert. His boys buried him because hippies, junkies, and Jews have this tradition in common, that we bury our own, and I know that some of the boys who were digging that day had done that before out on the mesa, but not by daylight and not with prayer. And amends come in a lot of different shapes, And it has been so beautiful. And this man who lived through so much, I can't even, there's not time, right? But what we were able to do together that we could not do alone was give him a good death, where he was peaceful and he felt safe and he knew he was loved and he was surrounded by people who cared for him and people who came to thank him and see him off and wish him well, and people who loved him. And we have a lot of medical professionals in our community, and they were there. Like, we'd say, oh my God, I need a nurse, and one would walk in the door. It was like a sitcom, you know. And there was also like this moment where I realized all of his horrible war stories were true just based on his morphine tolerance. Oh my God. And there were so many drugs through the house and so many newcomers, and all the drugs went where they were supposed to, and all the newcomers stayed clean. And if that's not God in action, I don't know what is. And what I am learning through this experience is that when I show up thinking I'm in charge, thinking I'm going to accomplish something, I am fucked, and if I think we're doing it in service, we are fucked. But when I show up vulnerable, when I show up in need, when I show up honest, when I show up desperate, when I show up real, the community creates itself. The fellowship builds, right? And we become something beyond our wildest dreams, outside of our imagination. And frequently, beyond our wildest dreams includes beyond our wildest nightmares. And there's great freedom in the worst thing happening, because then the worst thing has happened. So what are you going to do now? Bring it. And what I thought going into this was, my parents, I've buried my parents. I've done the work in the world that I thought was important for me to do. I've made my contribution. I'm taking care of the person I love. I'm done. When this is over, I'm done. That was what I was living on, was when this is over, I can be done. And what happened, because of this community that grew up around us, because of you guys, because of the love that we share in Narcotics Anonymous, that I have never seen anywhere else in this way, is that I finally came to understand, no, I'm not done, I'm starting. And that same, look, there's this reservation in our second step, right, that like, this is as well as I'm going to get, and I just need to be safe here, right? And what I know about my recovery is anytime I'm willing to work it like a newcomer, I will get change like a newcomer, and that my ability to recover is infinite. And the gifts that this program have to offer are infinite. But what I'm starting to understand now is that what we can do together is also infinite. And what we are doing now is starting. We are building a baby fellowship. We are only 65 years old. This is a new movement that is changing the world. If you have kids in recovery, look at them. You're changing history. Right? We are new, we're starting, we're founders, all of us. And what we can do together is beyond our imagining. We don't know yet what we have. We don't know our strengths. We don't know what we're good at. We don't know what we're about to accomplish. We don't know what we're here for. And that's the good news. I am so grateful today to be part of Narcotics Anonymous, because I know I'm part of a miracle. And I know I'm just warming up. I only have 32 years. This is starting for me. It's fresh. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this thing that is so big. We're all over the world. We're all over the world. And everywhere we are, the same thing is happening. We're picking up the throwaway people that nobody cares about. And we're changing. And we're changing ourselves, we're changing our lives, and we're changing the communities that we live in. And I don't know another more powerful instance of revolution than that. I am so grateful to you today. I really needed to share, and I needed a minute away to get a change of air and remember how big we are. Gosh, I don't know any of you yet. This is so exciting. Thank you so much for giving me this time.
Hey guys, let's circle up, close up, and then as soon as we're done with the circle, we need to clear out of this room completely. So just keep that in mind.
Oh my God. I looked right over it.
All right. Oh, no, we're not going to circle yet.
Mom, we can do it.
Let's close the circle, guys. You can do it. You'll get through it. Come on, come on.
Take control, George. I can't believe you got someone with you already. I see it.
All right, we stand here in the circle to represent what we can't do alone. We do together. Let's give a moment of silence to let our higher power do the thing he does for the newcomer. Put that energy out, bring them back to the circle. It happens every time we close up. We'll have a moment of silence for that, followed by a serenity prayer. Thank you, God.
God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Just for today.
You got to clear out. The magician was already trying to come in. So you want to make an announcement?
Yeah. Hey guys, just a reminder, we have to clear this room. If everybody could start just making the way to the door, please.
We gotta go. Show. We gotta get this podium down too.
The podium's connected to a cord.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not sure
That's okay.
where to unplug or what we need to.
It's okay.
I'm gonna run these to the tapers.
You gotta get Yep.
Excuse me.
Oh, pardon me.
I don't want you to think I'm hustling.
Yeah. Y'all gotta get out here. Thank you.
Granddaughter's still doing this. I was gonna ask you.
Oh, okay, I was looking for him. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.